Lord, it is a great honor and a blessing to be with you here this evening. And I thank Carol for the invitation and Stuart for all the work they do to bring me here. And Father, for allowing us to be here in this hall. And it's great to be back in Scotland. I love this part of the country, so green and so beautiful. And it is an opportunity for me to share with you the amazing graces of God that I'm sure each one of you can testify to that, because we belong to a people that has been chosen by God, and it's just a great blessing to acknowledge it and to be grateful to God for the gift of faith. So tonight is my turn to testify as to the amazing mercy of God, because I can tell you that I have been rescued from the darkness, and I'm so thankful. I wouldn't stop doing this until I die. I was born in Colombia in South America, up in the Andes Mountains in a small coffee growers town. And I was born in a Catholic family. I am the number 6 of 10 children, and we grew up with all the teachings and traditions of the Catholic faith. When I was 14 years old, they sent me to Bogota, the capital of Colombia, a big city. And those were the 1960s. And in the 1960s, Colombia had many American youngsters that were running away from the Vietnam War. And many of them were hippies, and they brought in the rock and roll and the hallucinating drugs. I was coming from a small town. I had no idea of all the things that were going on in the world. So very soon I was captivated by that culture and walked away from my Catholic faith and became like a New Age type of person with a syncretized type of spirituality, and fell into all this free love of the 60s. And when I was 20 years old, I got married in Bogota and moved to Germany, to the city of Hamburg. There I lived 7 years. I went to school at the University of Hamburg and became an actor and a musical composer. My 2 sons were born there, and after 7 years I moved to Hollywood, California. There I spent over 20 years working in the entertainment industry. All these years, since I left my hometown at age 14, I lived them completely away from God, focused on money, pleasure, fame, the life in the fast lane, and also New Age. I continue on. California was like, and it still is, like the capital of New Age. So I was in a New Age paradise. The only person that will tell me about God was my mother. She used to come and see me every 2 or 3 years, and she will always tell me, I am not very impressed with your success or your money. I am concerned about your soul. If you continue living the kind of life you're living and you die like this, you are going to have a very difficult time with God. I loved my mother dearly, but I didn't believe in her religion, so I didn't pay attention to her counseling. But in year 97, everything changed. I went to Colombia during Christmas, and that Christmas was a pretty sad Christmas in the family, because within the 4 years prior to that Christmas, 5 people of the family had died one after another. First, my wife died to cancer. Then my younger brother died in an accident in the sea. Then my father passed away. A few months later, another brother of mine committed suicide in Bogota. And not long after that, my mother passed away. So that Christmas, we were 4 sisters and me left. My sisters were practicing Catholics, and they didn't know I didn't practice my faith. Only my mother knew, but she never told them. So thinking that I was a practicing Catholic, they invited me to church to pray the Divine Infant's Christmas Novena, which is a pretty old Catholic tradition in Colombia. I went to church with them just to please them, but I didn't tell them that I haven't been in a Catholic church for 33 years. And the priest introduced the novena saying, when you pray the novena with devotion, the baby Jesus will grant you a grace. I didn't quite know what grace was, but it sounded to me like luck. And I said, maybe I can get something out of this. So I asked the baby Jesus to change my life. Little did I know I was talking to God, right? So he did change my life that Christmas. You probably imagine the change of life I wanted was something totally materialistic, but Jesus changed my life in a very painful way, his way, and today I wouldn't change it for the world, but it was a very difficult experience, as you are going to hear. The novena ends on the 24th of December at midnight mass. The 25th Christmas Day, I decided to go to spend the night at the coffee ranch plantation of one of my uncles. And as I was driving through the gate of the ranch, 6 guerrillas from the Revolutionary Army of Colombia jumped out of the woods with machine guns and kidnapped me. They tied my hands in the back, put a hood over my head, and took me prisoner to the jungle. Once in the jungle, they put me away in a cave. And the cave was filled with bats and all kinds of insects of the jungle. It was horrible. And altogether, I was kidnapped for 6 months. But the first 15 days, I was in that cave. They will take me out like once a day to go to the, to the forest for my needs. And they were waiting for another group of guerrillas to come and pick me up. It took them 15 days to come. So on the day 15, they showed up, took me out of the cave, untied me, took the hood off my head, and gave me all the instructions of the kidnapping. They wanted a pretty large sum of money from me. If I was to refuse paying it, they would kill all of my family. I was also sentenced to death. So they were going to kill me as soon as I paid the ransom. So they tied me up again, put the hood back on my head, and put me back in the cave. They told me they were going to pick me up the next day to take me somewhere else. So that night was the night when I had the experience with God that absolutely changed my life forever. I was in that cave that night completely broken and destroyed as a human being. I had no hope of making it out alive from the jungle. All my family were in danger of getting killed. The most important God I ever had in my life was money, and they were going to steal it all from me. So I couldn't be in a worse situation than that in my life. But then, though I was awake and conscious, I was in a dark cave with a hood over my head. I entered into an ecstasy. I was 47 years old that night, and in the ecstasy, I appeared at age 3 in the inside patio of the house where I was born in my hometown. I was on a tricycle with a stick in my hand, going through the gardens, hitting the plants and the flowers. And I could hear a maid of the house telling me not to do that. I was in panic, totally in panic, because I couldn't get off the ecstasy and I couldn't stop what was going on. And I continue on reliving my life little by little. By the time I was going through age 10 or 11, I began to go through the most excruciating pain. A pain that wasn't physical, it was the pain of my conscience. For 33 years, I lived in mortal sin away from God, and my conscience had been sleeping, and now it was waking up. And also, I had lost the fear of God, and I got it back So that made it even more difficult because I could perfectly see the sense of sin. I could perfectly see how much I had hurt people, how much I had offended God, how much I had placed my soul in so much danger. And the pain, I couldn't possibly describe it to you. I can only tell you that if I wouldn't have been in an ecstasy, I would have died of pain. And I continue on reliving my life. I think I did relive it all. Like I told you, I was 47 years old that night. This first part, we can call it an illumination of conscience. That is exactly what it was. Then something more mysterious happened. I continue on in the ecstasy. I didn't know what an ecstasy was. This I learned long after. I thought I was dying. That was my feeling. So I appeared face down against the grass in what felt like a pretty high mountain, in a silence that I could only call it a perfect silence, like I had never experienced in my life. I look up, and far away in the distance I could see another mountain even higher, and the top of the mountain was covered with fog, and the fog began to fade away slowly, and then the most extraordinary city of light appeared on that mountain. My heart knew that I had to have been there and didn't make it, and that troubled me greatly. But the two mountains were not connected, so I couldn't go there. And at that moment, I began to hear the sound of big waters that were approaching me. I couldn't see them, but I could perfectly hear them. And then after a while, it turned into the sound of many, many voices, and voices in perfect harmony, absolutely precious. And then it turned into one voice, and that voice was coming from everywhere. Since I just have had my illumination of conscience, I knew the terrible state of sin my soul was in. And though I had been away from God for so long and had worshipped so many false gods, the moment I heard the voice, I knew it was God's voice, but I wanted to disappear. I couldn't bear with the voice. The voice was absolute perfect love, but it was burning me. It was like, I felt like I was disintegrating with so much love. And the Lord kept me there. He spoke to me at length. I tell people if I were to live 100 more years, I wouldn't be able to tell you everything that was left infused in me from this conversation. Well, it wasn't exactly a conversation. He was the one talking. And he began telling me about the church. And he said, "The Catholic Church is my church. I chose you from the womb of your mother to be a Catholic, and you deserted it." He was not accusing me, but I was accusing myself. It was very painful. And then he said, "We are his people, his army, the chosen people, a people that has been set apart, a predestined, as St. Paul tells us too." And he said, "But salvation is for all of humanity, only that we are responsible for the salvation of souls because we are Eucharistic instruments of reparation." And then he showed me the 33 years I didn't take communion, and how many souls he could have rescued if I would have been faithful. I couldn't possibly tell you how painful that was. That was devastating for me. And then he spoke about priesthood, and he told me, there is no one among humans on earth that has a bigger power against Satan than a holy priest. He said, a holy priest makes hell tremble. And then he showed me the sacrament of confession and told me, the sacrament of confession is equal to an exorcism. And he showed me when he instituted the sacrament of confession right after he resurrected, he gave it to us as the most important tool to prepare ourselves to for communion. And then he showed me the passage of the disciples of Emmaus as they were walking with Jesus, not knowing it was him, but their hearts were on fire because of the word. But they didn't see it was Jesus until he broke the bread. So he showed me the true presence of God in the bread. When he broke the bread, they saw him, and then he disappeared. So he showed me how he proved the presence of God in the bread. And then he said to me that confession is the leading force to die to self. Because of original sin, we are built on self. And we can see that all human philosophies lead you to build yourself on self. And then he said, the conversation of Moses from the burning bush with God, at the moment, Moses asked him for the name. And God told him, my name is Yahweh, which means I am the only one who is. And he says, if I am, who are you? That means I am not. And for me to be, he has to be in me. And that's why confession is the biggest leading gift for us to go to the real I am and to die to self. And that frees us and exorcises us from idolatry and from sin. So he showed me how when I stopped going to confession, as soon as I made it to the big city and left the church, I became very weak spiritually, and the spirit of the world seduced me and took me away from the church for 33 years because I was weak. Because as Catholics, we need the sacraments. We need prayer. We need to be united in Christ in the church in order to be strong, because the devil knows who we are. We are his worst enemies because of the Eucharist. So we need to be strengthened by the sacraments. So then he told me about the Eucharist, and he showed me the priest in the sacristy. So the priest is in the sacristy putting on the liturgical vestments, preparing for Mass. And he says a big battle, a big spiritual battle takes place in the sacristy. So when the priest walks out towards the altar and kisses the altar, a big light descends from heaven and covers a big territory of people around. Not only Catholics, many people around. And during the time of the Mass, demons flee because they can't stand the light. So every time a Mass is celebrated, there is a big deliverance around. And that's why the Mass is one of the most amazing powers given to humanity. He says the Eucharist is one of the greatest gifts the Almighty Father gave humanity. Then when we are at Mass and we are in grace with God, and at that moment many people are dying around the world in danger of eternal damnation. When we come to take communion, Jesus rescues a soul from damnation with our communion. The biggest gift we take with us when we die as Catholics is the many souls Jesus was able to rescue with the Eucharist. It's one of the greatest gifts. And then he spoke to me about adoration to the Blessed Sacrament, another amazing gift, because he was talking about our greatest weakness, which is idolatry. So when we go to adoration, we are adoring the only God, the sun that shines from above, the power, the only power, and that exorcises all our idols, all our false gods. That's why adoration is so powerful. And also we bless our family, our church, our country, everyone, the human family, by giving company to Jesus in adoration to the Blessed Sacrament. He says it's one of the most powerful weapons against darkness in this world. So after that, he spoke to me about the commandments and about the 7 capital sins. And he said, the 7 capital sins are 7 legions of demons that fight the law of God. And he showed me 3 capital sins that had been in my life since my early youth, and the battle that they had within my life. So after that, I was placed in a lake with the water up to my waist. And in front of the lake, there was a big rock. On top of the rock on the right side, there was a man looking sideways. At first, I didn't know who he was. So I looked down towards the water where I was, and I see a floating mist like a fog. And when I looked at it closely, I noticed it was hundreds of spirits of evil. They were the demons of my mortal sins of 33 years. I couldn't possibly describe to you what I saw. They were like bundles, like germs, and I distinguished each one of them. My soul knew them all. It is so incredibly scary and terrible that if one only knew what a demon is, you will never want to have anything to do with sin. I guarantee you that. I spend my whole life now telling people how important it is to understand we are in a spiritual battle and it's real. And Satan is defeated by God. But we have to be faithful in order to win the battle against the devil. We have to be one with God. So then I looked towards the left of the lake, and I could see this cloud of demons were going down towards an abyss on the left of the lake. When I looked down the abyss, I could see there were many levels of condemnation. And I could see how deep down my soul had fallen already because of the sinful life I had lived. And this was so incredibly difficult. I looked out for help. The only light that was there was that man that was on top of the rock. And when I looked at him, I realized it was my guardian angel. And he was not communicating to me with a voice. He was communicating directly to my heart. But I knew everything I told you briefly about the lake and the demons and the abyss. He was showing to me. He was the one showing it to me. On the right side of the lake, I was shown the lowest part of purgatory in total darkness, which will take a long time to describe to you. I'm going very fast through all the steps because this is incredibly long. So the angel took me to my hometown, the town where I was born. And I appeared at age 11 in a procession of Our Lady, the Virgin Mary, at night. And I was the main trumpet player of the school band. I was playing the trumpet behind a statue of Our Lady that 4 schoolmates of mine were carrying. And we marched through town for a while. And then Our Lady appeared walking in front of me. I could only see her from the back. She had 2 children, one from each hand. And the angel began telling me that my mother had consecrated me to Our Lady in her womb. And Our Lady never abandoned me all those years that I was away from God. And the child that she had on her right hand was me at age 7. So he told me. And then he began telling me about the power of prayer. He called it the economy of prayer. And then he showed me the rosaries in the procession. And some of the rosaries they were like a sunshine. Some of the rosaries had less light, and some had no light. So he was telling me about the prayer from the heart, and prayer that was just recitation, just like Psalmodia, only, no heart, no spirit. And I went back to the lake, and the rock was filled with light. And I knew that light was Jesus, but I knew I couldn't bear with the light because I was standing in the darkness of my sin in the lake. So I bent down, escaping the light, and I could see on the right side of the rock Our Lady again. This time she was facing me, and I was connected to her like through an umbilical spiritual cord. And everything that was flowing out of my heart, my anguish, the state I was in that lake, was going towards her. And from her towards the light that was Jesus. And this went on and on for a long time, and it was very, very painful, extremely painful. But I know it was a rescue. And after a while, they pulled me from my neck up to face the light. And I couldn't bend my head anymore. I was blinded by the light. And after a while, I could see the silhouette of Jesus in the light. Gigantic, all light. Rays of light were coming from his eyes towards me. As they touched me, I felt they were burning me. But I knew it was a rescue. I knew it was love, but it was very painful. And light was coming out of his chest, his hands, everywhere in his body. And I went through this for I don't know how long, and then I came off the ecstasies. And I spent 5.5 months more as a prisoner in the jungle after Jesus appeared to me. Every day of the kidnapping, I was begging the Lord not to let me die without confession. But I was sentenced to death. So you probably imagine all the drama, the anguish I went through during that time. I knew only a miracle could rescue me. I was praying for that miracle. And 6 months to the date of the kidnapping, that miracle took place. I had been tied up to a tree all day long. It was nighttime already, very dark. And 4 guerrillas came with machine guns and untied me and told me to follow them. And I followed them through the woods until a road. When we got to the road, they told me to walk straight and not to look back. That was the longest walk of my life. I was sure they were going to shoot me. But they just left me there and they went back to the jungle. But I didn't know what they were doing because I had been through all kinds of physical and psychological tortures during all that time. So I didn't know what they were up to. So I walked for a long time in the darkness of the road until an old bus showed up. And after a struggle, they picked me up and took me out of the jungle. They didn't want me because I had a terrible, I had lost all my weight, looks like a skeleton, and they thought I was just a crazy person in the jungle. But they finally let me in and took me out of the jungle. As soon as I recupered little, I went to confession at a Franciscan monastery. And you probably imagine it was the longest confession ever. But to me, the real freedom I was looking for was confession. I was happy to have come out of the jungle. It was a miracle. But the freedom I wanted was confession because I knew all the demons I saw in that lake were still in my life. And I knew only the church had the power to free me. So when this priest gave me the absolution, I can never tell you what I felt. It was the most amazing freedom that I felt. I knew all those demons were gone, and I could feel it. I could feel it. So that was the beginning of my new life. I went back to California, to my home in Los Angeles, and began to learn how to be a Catholic again. I spent about 2 years just learning to be a Catholic, going to Mass every day, to confession very often, reading the catechism and learning about the church in silence. I never told anyone for 2 years anything about the experience. So past those 2 years, I went back to Colombia during a Holy Week. And on Palm Sunday at noon Mass in a big church in Bogota, I didn't make it in because it was packed with people, so I was in the atrium of the church looking in through the main door. And all I could see at the end there was a big crucifix that was hanging from the top of the altar. And during the offertory of the Mass, while I was looking at the crucifix, I had another experience with Jesus. At first, I thought I was fainting because I felt dizzy, but I was actually entering into another ecstasy with the Lord. This time, Jesus didn't speak to me with a voice. He communicated the same way my guardian angel did, to my heart. And he showed me that I had been born for this mission. I was already 49 years old. I was totally broken as a person because the kidnapping had hurt me a lot. So I was afraid of many things. I had many problems, but I was only healing myself through the church. And the Lord began showing to me the mission. He was going to take me all around the world. Every place I was going to go to, He had already chosen. All the people that were going to hear me, He had already chosen by name. He was going to take care of me. Everything I was going to share was infused in my heart in perfect harmony with the Catholic doctrine. And He said He was going to take care of me. I shouldn't be afraid. So I walked out of that church, and I knew only a miracle could make that happen. But Jesus had already performed a big miracle in my life when He rescued me from the jungle. So I knew that He was going to do something about the mission that I couldn't possibly do on my own because I didn't have vitality or nothing. I was totally broken. But I went to see the priest, the Franciscan, where I went to confession the first time when I came out of the jungle. And he ended up being my guide because the Lord showed me clearly he had been chosen to be my spiritual father. This is 23 years ago, 1999. I walked away from my artistic career and became a lay Catholic missionary. Founded a mission with the Archdiocese of Bogota. And I've been traveling the world for 23 years. The Lord had taken me to over 120 countries in all the continents. I live of divine providence and I have never lacked anything in 23 years. This is what I do. I have written 13 books and many mystical themes that have developed through the years, through the preachings and teachings of all these years of missions. And this is what I do. So I tell you, to end this testimony, that one of the most important reasons I like doing this and I follow the Lord in His calling is because I know how important it is for us to understand that this life is very short and we have no time to waste because we don't have time. The time belongs only to God. If we knew how much time we have, then it will be different. But none of us know how much time we have. So the time to change the heart, the time for conversion of the heart, the time to be really a person of God, to be one with God, is now, is not tomorrow. I guarantee you that. I don't recommend you to die not being prepared to be with God, because we are facing a real reality in the spiritual world, and there are good spirits and bad spirits, and you don't want to deal with the devil. You don't want to deal with demons like I had to. I don't desire that to anyone, not even to my worst enemies. So I know, and you can read in the scriptures something very important, and it is God's will. St. Paul tells us, God's will is our sanctification. See, only saints enter heaven. Only saints. And you have to realize, you have to be brave to be good. Because you have to be brave to forgive. You have to be brave to be patient, to be compassionate, to be charitable. You have to be brave. Only the brave make it to heaven. Cowards are in hell. And this is what we have to have clear. You have to be brave to love. You have to be brave to obey God. And this is something important to have. We have to fight for that courageousness. We have to fight to be real. And I tell you, you will never regret it. If you only knew what Jesus has prepared for us If we obey him, you will spend the rest of your life on your knees. I guarantee you that. I gave up everything and dedicated myself to do just this, because there is nothing more important in this life than to bring people, to bring God to people. This is our main mission in this life, to bring God to people. If a soul in purgatory will have the opportunity to show up here and tell us two things, will tell us, sanctify your life and bring God to everyone you meet. I surely know a soul will tell you that. Amen.
Amen.